Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Carl Letamendi, and this is the video lecture for the Fin 1100 class, Chapter 2, from the Personal Finance book. And this chapter is titled Some Basic Ideas of Finance, and the presentation opens with a quote from Adam Smith, prominent so-called economist of the time. Money, says the proverb, makes money. When you've got a little, it's often easy to get more. The great difficulty is to get that little. And he wrote a lot, and during his times, the most cited book of his is The Wealth of the Nations, which was originally published in 1776. Now, there's one thing about Adam Smith that I'd like to tell y'all because he's used a lot as a reference in the realm of economics and sociology, but I think that his perspectives have a lot to do with a lot of his personal background. So, for instance, Adam Smith was the one who came up with the idea of the invisible hand, meaning that the economy regulates itself, that it does not require any sort of regulation from an outside force. But we have to consider the context of when Adam Smith grew up and some things such as his religion that had a lot to do with why he perceived the world the way he did. So, like for example, if you take a look at the idea of the religion of deism, for example, he practiced this religion called deism. If you look at what the religion deism entails, the deist religion entails, and then you go back and you look at this idea of the invisible hand, it mirrors each other. So it's like exactly the same thing. And also, Adam Smith was a Scottish young man, and when he was growing up, his country was being invaded. So of course, anything that has to do with the hegemony of an exterior force coming in to regulate your life would be a bad thing. So these are just a couple of things to keep in mind. Of course, that's a whole topic on its own, but we won't discuss that during this. But my recommendation is if you see Adam Smith or you're discussing economists or anything like that, use a combination to diversify your theory of economy. So in this chapter, we're going to go over income and expenses, way off from the topic of Adam Smith. So the learning objectives are to identify and compare the sources and uses of income, identify the budget balances that result from the uses of income, discuss the remedies for budget deficits and surpluses, define the opportunity and sunk cost, and discuss their effects of financial decision making. So we have multiple sources of income. When we work in a job, we're basically selling labor, and the return or the income that we're earning are wages or salary, right? We either get paid by the hour or yearly, divided in bi-weekly payments. And work is also part of what's called the labor market. Okay, when you invest, what you're doing is you're selling capital. The return or the income that you're getting is a profit or a dividend um, off of that investment. Dividend is used more like in when you get um, payments from stocks. But then there's also another one that's not captured here in as far as investment, and they're called coupon payments. And coupon payments are is the verbiage used for dividends on bonds, any kind of bond, a corporate bond or a federal bond or whatever. Those don't typically have losses except on during the first year when you buy the bond at a discount, but we're not going to cover bonds in this class, I don't think. Then you can also rent capital, which basically means that you're borrowing, and then or you can actually lend. When you're renting your capital out, your income is the interest, and the market is the credit market, and so is the market. And the capital market is for investments. So in the labor market, we mean buyer's market. The employee is the seller, employer is the buyer. In the capital market, that's the seller's market. The investments made by the buyer, the investor is the seller. Expenses are costs for items or resources that are used up or consumed in the course of daily living. Expenses recur, that is, they happen over and over again because we have things such as food, housing, clothing, energy, etc., which are used up on a daily basis, but not all the time. I'm originally from New York, and in the New England area, we don't usually, well, energy could be subdivided, but like in the New England area, usually you don't have apartment buildings with central air conditioning, for example. That's why you see sometimes the box sticking out of the window because that was added on. But a lot of apartments in the New England area, Rhode Island, Maine, New York, the Massachusetts area, they don't really have like air conditioning. They'll have their heaters in their units, but this concept of air conditioning doesn't exist because it's always cool to begin with. So unless you live in an area where it's not required, I mean, these are going to be your recurring expenses. When your income is less than your expenses, you have a budget deficit. You're not in good shape. You can reduce expenses as a strategy. You can consume less, and the objective is going to be to reduce the deficit. You can also increase your income, the which is going to make you earn more, and again, the objective here is going to be to reduce the deficit. Or you can borrow, um, which increases your expenses because you're adding to the amount of debt that you have, and this increases the deficit because now you owe more. Opportunity costs are the sacrifice of exclusive choice, and here it says coulda, woulda, shoulda. I would have put a little something different. So, as an example, for those of you who are unfamiliar with opportunity cost, all of you are here at Broward College learning, right? So, this is taking up time in your day. So, I've heard um, psychologists say that a healthy individual should divide up their day into three parts: eight, eight, and eight, right? There's 24 hours in a day. 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for work, and 8 hours for recreation and personal time. Of course, I mean we don't split up our days in eight, 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 but there's time that's involved in prepping and getting ready for work. We have to commute back from work, and that takes away from our personal time. And you're using up some of that discretionary time that you have to be here as a student. You could earn more money by getting another job instead of being here, yes, but you're not. Like you're investing your time. So, but there's an opportunity cost to being here instead of, working a second job, for example. And then sunk costs are things that have already been spent. So that money's done and it's gone and it's never coming back. Some key takeaways: it's important to understand the sources of income and uses of funds and the budget deficit or budget surplus that may result. Wages or salary is income from employment or self employment. Interest is earned by lending. A dividend is the income from owning corporate stock. And then, as I also said, a coupon payment is what they call the dividends for bonds. You'll hear that term used if you look into that. And a draw is income from a partnership, because you draw income from the partnership. Deficits or surpluses need to be addressed, and that means making decisions about what to do with them. Increasing income, reducing expenses, and borrowing are the three ways to deal with budget deficits, although borrowing will add to your debt. Spending more, saving, and investing are three ways to deal with budget surpluses. Although spending more, I wouldn't say is a great way to deal with budget surpluses, because here it kind of frames it as though a budget surplus is a problem. I mean, you have money when at the end that can't possibly be a bad thing. But these are things that you could do with it. Opportunity costs and sunk costs are hidden expenses that affect financial decision making. Next, we're going to talk about assets. We're going to identify the purpose and uses of assets, identify the types of assets, explain the role of assets in personal finance, and explain how capital gain or loss is created. So there's different things that an asset does for you or that you can do with. You can convert it to cash, you can store wealth, you can create income, or you can use it to reduce expenses. So, but we have to keep in mind that it does get a little bit more complex when you were talking about an asset. Like, let's say you have a car that gets paid off. Um, Over time, that asset is going to depreciate in value, so it's going to be worth less. So if you take too long to try to convert it to cash, you're gonna get less money from it. That's one asset that depreciates quickly, that I can think of the top of my head. So again, as we said, you can convert it to cash, which is basically selling it for cash. Um, you can store the wealth and then sell it at a higher price or sell it at a lower price. Um, if you sell at a higher price, you get a capital gain. If you sell it at a lower price, that's considered a capital loss. You can also use assets to generate income, such as rent, interest, or dividend. So, like if you have property and you initially invested in it and you're renting it out, you're filling up that home with equity or that property with equity. So, that's one example of how you can use rent to create income. And you can also use it to reduce expenses. Um, Cheaper than renting is what the textbook provides as an example. So these are some assets. With a car, you use it. You can reduce expenses. It cannot increase your income unless you are an Uber driver. Then that's one innovative way to use your car to create income. And store wealth, no. A savings account, it does not reduce your expenses. It does increase your income, but very little. I mean, if you can look on your own time the historical the way that the savings account um, returns have fluctuated over time. So, I mean, now you can have 500, 1,000, 10,000, even $100,000 in a savings account, but it's not gonna give you the same returns that we used to get like 20, 30 years ago. So, and there's also implications, like some savings account you cannot withdraw a certain amount of time per month from these accounts and things like that. But it's a good alternative to a checking account and to move money aside that you don't want to spend. Store wealth, yes. For the money market accounts, it does not reduce your expenses, it increases your income, and you can store the wealth. Same as the savings account, except money market account may be a little more restricted than a savings account in that you have to leave the money in there for a certain amount of time. If your asset is a home, it does reduce your expenses, and I'll show you an example. And I just lost my spot. So let's say that there's a like a condominium, right? A condo for two bedroom, two bath, selling at, I don't know, like $175,000, right? If you can decide to purchase that if you have money for down payment and whatnot, or if you're renting it, let's say a comparable unit, like closer to the beach, like Dania Beach or Hollywood Beach area, um, two bedroom, two bath, may run you $1,500 a month, right? 1,500 a month. So then essentially what you're paying per year is $18,000. So if if you're a renter, you're like, all right, that this is an amount of my income that I'm willing to forego per year in order to live in this place. But suppose it were a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage, you're paying $18,000 a year. That two bedroom, two bathroom property that you're renting has now is it, over the life of what would be a mortgage has cost you $540,000, a little over $500,000. The worst part is when you walk away from this property, it's still not yours. You have paid the equity. You have put in equity into whoever owns the property. So that's not to say that renting is always worse than buying. At least here in the New York area, for example, where I'm currently at now, um, if you want to get a studio apartment in Manhattan, a studio apartment will cost you $3,000 a month, right? Times 12, that's 36,000. And suppose it were a mortgage, you'd be paying $1 million. And sometimes a studio in Manhattan will actually cost you more than $1 million to buy. So, sometimes depending on the market, it would make a difference. Rental property, you do not reduce expenses, you do increase income, and you do store the wealth because whoever's living in that property of yours is paying into your equity. Investment in bonds does not reduce your expenses. It does increase your income, and you do get to store the wealth. Investment in stocks reduces your expenses, increases your income, and it does store your wealth. So same situation with these right here, these three: rental property, investment in bonds, investment in stock. Assets are items with economic value that can be converted to cash. You use excess liquidity or surplus cash to buy an asset to store wealth until you resell the asset. An asset can create income and or reduce expenses and or store wealth. Um, to have value as an investment, an asset must either store wealth or create income. Ideally, an asset can do both of these things. Whatever the choice of an asset, investing in assets or selling capital can be more profitable than selling labor. In some instances, selling an asset can result in a capital gain or capital loss. Selling capital means you're trading in the capital markets, which is a seller's market. You can do this only if you have a budget surplus, an excess of income over expenses, which is what a budget surplus means. Debt and equity. Learning objectives are to define debt and equity, compare and contrast the benefits and cost of debt and equity, illustrate the uses of debt and equity, and analyze the cost of both. So when we're talking about equity, um, you're buying capital. The expense of that is you're distributing profit, and the market is considered the capital market. When we're dealing with debt, you're borrowing capital. The expense or the cost of that is that you're paying interest, and the market that it's traded in is called the credit market. When you hear that being mentioned on the news, so some of the possible uses of debt is to help you reduce time, reduce expenses, and also increase income. However, I'd say put a little star next to this because sometimes when you increase your debt, you don't always increase your income. I would have rephrased this, um, not increase income, but increase leverage. Because if you got 10,000 cash and you've got 15,000 in credit, that increases your leverage to 25,000 to make a purchase or like an investment or something like that, but not necessarily increase your income because it's you still have to pay it back. Some examples of reducing time is you get a credit card, and basically it gives you the leverage that you're gonna need to make the purchase that you're gonna make, meaning that you don't have to work um, the amount of time that's required to get that amount of money that you can just get on a credit card. A mortgage, also same situation, an auto loan, and then a student loan. And student loan is actually an interesting beast on its own, and it's actually not managed the same way as these other three loans. It works very differently with its own set of rules. Um, okay, another use of debt is again to reduce expenses. Remember the example that I gave of renting versus buying? So then getting a mortgage will reduce your expenses if you're looking at it in that context. Otherwise, if you're living in a metropolitan area and you're making a decision of renting versus buying, and you consider the rent a cost of getting XYZ income that you're going to earn, then then you're making that decision until you decide that you want to purchase a home. Um, However, one thing that I've seen happen in growing up in Broward, because I grew up most of my life in Broward, is that in the early 2000s we had the real estate boom, which is when a lot of the West Broward area was developed, and there was a lot of, I want to call it propaganda, and marketing techniques, and all this to try to pressure people into purchasing homes, getting into adjustable rate mortgages for those of you who um, who are familiar with mortgage lingo. And a lot of time what happened is that a lot of people started to default on their mortgages or not pay them. And when that happens, the people with adjustable rate mortgages end up paying it. Like when you're looking at it from a systemic perspective, they end up paying for that. So a lot of homes went in foreclosure, people went in bankruptcy, and it just it was a disaster. So you want to make sure that you continue this. If you're using the debt to reduce expenses, you're deciding to buy a house as opposed to renting, you want to get into a fixed mortgage, a fixed rate mortgage, because adjustable is one of those things that'll get you in trouble for variables that you don't even have control over. Um, Auto loans are going to be fixed, so it's the same. It's a different situation. But you can use the auto loan to reduce your expenses, because maybe there's a certain cost to getting yourself to work. And of course, it's always cheaper than getting a taxi, right? And you can also use a student loan um, to reduce your expenses if you're looking at it um, time wise in the long run, because You're investing your time to get an education, and in the long run, you'll make more money, right? If well, at least that's the hope that that with an education, you're going to be able to move forward and earn higher. Uses of debt: you can increase your income um, by using a student loan. The student loan itself, however, does not increase your income. It gives you the ability to study, right? And so I don't know how many of you are in are actually using student loans to buy for your tuition at Broward. But as an example, if you are on a student loan program currently, the you're accepting that debt to increase your income in the long run after you graduate. Unless, of course, you drop out, so stay in school. Debt and equity. Key takeaways are that financing assets through equity means sharing ownership and whatever gains or losses that brings. Financing assets through borrowing and creating debt means taking on a financial obligation that must be repaid. Both equity and debt have cost and value. Both equity and debt enable you to use an asset sooner than you otherwise could and therefore reap more of its rewards. Now we're going to talk about income and risk. Learning objectives are to describe how sources of income may be diversified. Um, and as was learned in the first chapter, diversification helps in minimizing loss and risk. Describe how investments and assets may be diversified and explain the use of diversification as a risk management strategy. So now we're coming to the conclusion of this presentation, but just real quick. You can diversify your sources of income across the capital markets and also the labor markets, which means you can get a job and you can also invest. Diversifying sources of income in both the labor market and the capital market is the best hedge against risk in any one market. So basically, all that means, going back here to the last slide, is that putting all of your efforts into just one of these markets is not a great way to hedge against any risk or possible losses you may have. So what the textbook or the authors of the book are recommending is that you do not you depend on all the income from from stocks, for example, and not work. We hear I hear a lot of um, I've seen a lot of commercials of people saying like, oh, I work from home and I make 15,000 and you can do this too. I used to live paycheck to paycheck. Well, most of the world lives like that. You know what I mean? Like, so don't feel that pressure if you're currently working and you're making it and everything is okay to make such a risky move because you have the safety of your employment and you don't know what risks are involved in pursuing this other endeavor of for example, like launching your own business without proper planning right away. um, so like for example, I've had a couple of endeavors in the last couple years. I've created a provisional patent for some software that I created, but I still kept my job. I still kept my day job. I didn't just quit my job and say yes, this is gonna work out, because the end result is that I created my provisional patent, which protected me for a year, and excuse me, and I couldn't sell it. Nobody wanted to buy it. There was a couple of implications with it, and then someone with more money who could create a better prototype took it and did sell it. So I mean, it just works like that when you make investments. Some win, some lose. There's a 90% failure rate for new startups for restaurants, according to entrepreneur.com. So this is just a suggestion that if you're making it with your day job, keep your day job and consider the risks that are involved in in anything else. This concludes the PowerPoint presentation for Chapter 2 of the Personal Finance Text. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to email me, and I'll be more than happy to help. Thanks, and